Dr. Chris, orthopedic surgeon and sports medicine physician. And today, I'm reacting to Game of Thrones injuries.
The things I do for love.
Like everybody else in the world, I have to say that Game of Thrones is my favorite TV show. Because I'm like a science fiction fantasy guy. Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, my favorite series of books. One day my brother says to me, Chris, did you know that they actually have a TV show? Lo and behold, HBO had created a TV show. I was hooked. Since that time, I've watched every episode and I love the show.
Oh yeah!
One thing about George R. Martin's series is that, yeah, it's pretty violent and lots of people get injured. Sometimes they get permanently injured. So I thought it would be interesting to combine a reaction to injuries video with the favorite show that I love or the favorite book series that I read. So that's what we're gonna do today. If you have a particular injury that you like that we didn't show in this video, be sure to let us know down below in the comment section, and maybe, if you're lucky, I'll do a part 2. So this first injury comes from a little confrontation where Sir Jaime Lannister is being held captive by Locke and his crew of unfriendly characters. Jaime and Brianna of Tarth are both there together. At some point, Locke decides to make an example of Jaime because Jaime comes from a family of wealth, and he usually has the name of his father, Sir Tywin Lannister, to protect him. He decides that he's going to make an example of Jaime for whatever reason. So basically, after a brief conversation with Jaime, Jaime is positioned sort of prostrated over a log in front of him with both hands out in front because he had shackles around both wrists. Locke turns away from him for a moment, and then as he turns back, he immediately proceeds to chop off Jaime's hand with his sword.
You're nothing, daddy, oh daddy.
In this particular case, this is what we would call a traumatic amputation. So he loses his dominant hand here. Fortunately, he lost it at the level of the wrist, and although there might be some extensive hemorrhage from this injury, as long as they applied some hemostasis or as long as they put some pressure on the bleeding, eventually the bleeding would probably stop. You know, they might have to actually cauterize this wound to get it to stop, but eventually the bleeding would stop, and in this case it does. Sir Jaime Lannister loses his right hand and he goes on to fight another day. Well, maybe not fight, but he goes on to live another day, and eventually he gets a golden hand prosthesis to replace the hand that he lost. Although this is not a medical legal case, since he lost his dominant hand and he was the best swordsman in the country, if this were a case that had gone to court in the modern day system, you could expect Jaime Lannister to probably net approximately $70,000 from this injury. Just food for thought. So since we're on the topic of the Lannisters, we might as well talk about Jaime's brother, Tyrion, and the injury he suffered. So in this particular video, Tyrion gets injured in the Battle of the Blackwater. And during this battle, he actually takes a sword blow right to the face. A facial laceration, plus or minus facial fractures. And this is a little bit different than what occurs in the book, because in the book, he actually loses half his nose. If you watch the scene, you can see that he actually took quite a blow to the face. So we can assume not only would he have the facial laceration, but that he would also have some facial fractures behind this. And at the level where he was hit or struck by the sword tip, he probably would have fractured his orbital, possibly also his maxilla, and maybe even his mandible. Although the scar that they have on the TV show doesn't seem to go all the way through his lower jaw as well, but he would have probably fractured at least 2, if not 3 of the bones of his face. So in this third one, this is one of the earliest major injuries of the book. It was quite shocking when I read it, and it was quite shocking when I saw it on TV. We see that Brandon Stark, who was a child at the time, is climbing one of the towers on the property at Winterfell. And as he does that, he climbs up to one of the windows at the very top of the tower. He happens to catch sight of something that he shouldn't be seeing. We have Sir Jaime Lannister getting a little bit frisky with his sister, Cersei Lannister. Brandon, as a child, doesn't really know any better, so he just kind of sits in the window, only to allow Jaime Lannister to come over and basically push him from the window.
The things I do for love.
Can't really tell you exactly what height this is. I would assume that this is from a height of at least 40 to 50 feet. In the story, Brandon is in a coma for an extended period of time before he actually regains consciousness. But when he does so, we discover that he has now become a paraplegic, meaning he has suffered a spinal cord injury below the level of his upper extremities. His arms work, his head and neck work, but his legs no longer are functional. And from this point forward, Brandon either has to be rolled around in a wheelchair or he has to be carried from somebody's back. In my own training, I have operated on somebody who has fallen from a height of 60 feet, landing on the grass, and they have survived. That patient, unfortunately, ended up being a quadriplegic, but they did survive. I have also been involved in the case of a patient who fell from a height of 100 feet.
What?
He fell from the 10th floor of an apartment building, and he managed to survive with relatively few fractures. This particular patient fell during the wintertime, and he ended up falling directly into a very large snowbank or snow mound. That patient did not even suffer any paralysis after that injury. Depending on the circumstance, you could survive a 10-story or 100-foot drop, but not very likely. I would probably guess 50 to 60 feet is probably the most that someone is going to fall and survive. So this next one is from Ned Stark. In this particular case, Ned Stark, who has run afoul of the Lannisters, is actually due to be executed. Here we have Ned Stark basically on the chopping block. We don't actually see the beheading directly, but we can see the executioner winding up with a huge greatsword or a broadsword. Not really a lot to say about this injury. This type of injury includes a transection of the spine itself, the spinal cord, the carotid arteries and veins, as well as all the muscles of the neck region. More interestingly, however, is the fact that there has been some research into how long someone is aware after they have been beheaded.
Don, you're a little controversial.
And you may find it fascinating that death is not instantaneous after a beheading. Sounds kind of gruesome. Okay, so this next one is of Theon Greyjoy. And if you recall, Theon was a captive of the Starks, or a guest of the Starks for an extended period of time before he was captured by Ramsay Bolton. And as you may recall from the story or from the TV show, Ramsay Bolton was a little bit of a psychopath. He had a penchant for torture. One of the things he did was torture Theon Greyjoy, and he did so at length. We don't get to see the actual event here for this injury, but we do get to see some of the aftermath, and we'll show the scene here with Ramsay Bolton talking to Theon Greyjoy and then eating a sausage. He does so because of the imagery associated with the injury or the torture that he has submitted Theon Greyjoy to. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about, basically he did a penile amputation.
What'd you say?
That's right, you heard me correctly.
Pork sausage. You think I'm some sort of savage?
He amputated his penis. That's kind of brutal. And again, once you got past the initial period of hemorrhage and you were able to stop the bleeding either through prolonged pressure or through cauterization, this is something that you could live with for the remainder of your life without any significant problems. Granted, I said significant problems, you'd still have problems. For example, micturition. That is the act of urination. That would be a little bit problematic. Not that you would be unable to do so, but it might become a little bit more messy than it was previously. And that's assuming that there has been no significant damage to the urethra at the level of the amputation. Other people might wonder, does this affect your sex drive? I don't think it would have anything to do with your sex drive, because that has to do with your level of testosterone, and that comes from your testes, and so that's not involved at all. The actual act of copulation might become problematic because really there's not anything there to do it with.
Yeah, I got it.
So in this next scene here, we have Viserys Targaryen, who is related to Daenerys Targaryen. He is here in the encampment of Khal Drogo, which is Daenerys Targaryen's new husband. Khal basically had promised him a golden crown. He takes a bunch of gold ornaments that he has within his tent, puts them in a cauldron over the fire, and then as he has two of his men holding Viserys, he pours the molten gold over Viserys' head, subsequently giving him a molten golden crown. Lo and behold, Viserys dies from this.
A crown for a king.
That's going to burn all the layers of your skin. So, in the very least, you're going to have grade 3 burns. If you have grade 3 burns and they are treated promptly with adequate resuscitation and medical treatment, someone can survive 3rd-degree burns on up to 50% of their body. However, it's important to know that there are significant problems with fluid loss and metabolic disturbances after this severity of injury. In some cases, however, the burning is so severe that now we have grade 4 burning, or what we call black or char burns. And in these type of burns, the burning has gone beyond the level of the skin into the tissue underneath, including the bones, fascia, and the muscles. And this type of burn is much more severe and carries with it a significantly higher level of mortality and morbidity. If they're localized to a small area, a grade 4 is something that could be survived if there was prompt medical attention and excision of the burnt area. I would venture to guess that was not available in Khal Drogo's tent, and lo and behold, Viserys succumbs to his injuries. Grade 3 and 4 burns of the head, neck, upper extremity, and torso. Seems like a bad way to go. Since we've been talking about burns, well, we should probably talk a little bit about fire. And here we have a servant of the God of Light, Sir Beric Dondarrion. In this particular scene, we have Sir Beric fighting with the Hound. After they have a disagreement, it basically comes to blows, and they're having a sword fight. Both of them are pretty good swordsmen. The Hound gets the upper hand. He basically uses his broadsword to cleave Sir Beric from head to mid-torso on his right-hand side. This, in technical terms, from a medical standpoint, is called a traumatic 4/4 partial amputation. Basically, he cut off 1/4 of his body. And he didn't really cut the whole thing off because he cut him partway through and then the sword kind of got stuck right here in his mid-torso. That is a fatal injury. There are so many things here to injure. If we go just from top to bottom, you can have an extreme vascular injury by cutting through the subclavian artery and vein, which are located just under the clavicle. Directly below that, of course, you could have a pulmonary laceration or a pulmonary injury when you cut through the lung. And of course, if you have a pulmonary injury, then you're gonna have pneumothorax because air is gonna come from inside the lung, spill out into the chest cavity. And you might also have a sucking chest wound, but probably not because you're not gonna have a little hole, you're gonna have a rather large hole in the torso. Over and above that, of course, you're gonna have a cardiac injury because your heart is located within your chest cavity, just below the ribs on the left-hand side of your body. And so, First, when you cut through the pericardium, you're gonna have an injury to that, and then of course you're gonna cut the heart, and you're gonna have blood spilling out from the heart into the pericardium. So not only will you have cardiac hemorrhage or pericardial hemorrhage, but you'll probably also end up with some degree of cardiac tamponade, which is when the blood squeezes down on the heart, and it's going to decrease your heart's capacity to deliver blood anywhere else. But that's not really gonna matter anyway, because the blood vessels that are delivering blood to the rest of you are now open, and it's just gonna be spilling out into your chest cavity, onto the floor. And yes, in the end, that's a fatal injury.
Wow.
Lo and behold, the God of Light was not having any of it. Within about a minute, he brings Sir Beric Dondarrion back from the dead. No injury, no cuts, no nothing. Good as new.
Not today.
Like, if the Lord of Light can do that, why can't the Lord of Light fix his eye? So the second last one is Khal Drogo. In this particular one, like, he just has a small injury. So, like, what's the deal? You know, one of Khal Drogo's own men decides that he is going to go against him. In this fight, he receives a scratch to his chest from his opponent's sword. As he says on the show, it's a flesh wound, and he does nothing about it. Subsequent to this, he actually develops an infection from this wound. He becomes septic, goes into a coma, and ends up ultimately dying because of this flesh wound. In the time portrayed in the movie, probably their level of cleanliness was not that high. Also, their access to antibiotics was non-existent. The open wound served as an entry point for bacteria to get into Khal Drogo's bloodstream. He subsequently developed a skin infection, and because he never treated the skin infection, he went on from what is generally a localized infection called cellulitis to develop a systemic infection, which is called sepsis. If sepsis goes on for a long enough period of time without appropriate treatment from antibiotics, then you can develop multi-organ system failure. And eventually, this leads to death. If I had anything to tell Khal Drogo, it would be this. Dude, next time, be sure to clean the wound and have your tetanus shot up to date. And last but not least, we gotta finish with my man, Jon Snow. So in this scene, multiple members of the Night's Watch stab Jon Snow in the chest and abdomen, basically with what is believed to be a fatal end. Jon Snow suffers multiple lacerations to the abdomen and to the chest. First is the thing that is going to kill you in the immediate to short term, and that is extensive hemorrhage or blood loss. You could quickly lose most, if not all, of your blood volume into the intra-abdominal cavity. The thing that will kill you after that, when you think about what's moving around inside your abdomen, you have food in various stages of breakdown. And not only do you have food products, but you also have bacteria within the digestive tract in very, very high amounts. And that bacteria is okay as long as it remains within the digestive tract. But if it's allowed to escape outside of the digestive tract and into the abdominal cavity, that becomes a problem. Then you will develop peritonitis, or infection of the abdominal cavity. And peritonitis that is untreated will quickly become what's called a surgical abdomen, which will eventually cause significant morbidity or death if not treated appropriately. Jon was nowhere near a trauma center where he could have an exploratory laparotomy performed or have his vascular or gastrointestinal lacerations treated. This is something that Jon died from. But as we saw with Sir Beric Dondarrion, the gods had other things in mind for Jon. They brought Jon back from the dead to lead the Night's Watch and to go on to lead the Army of the North, because the winter is coming. There you have it. Today we've been reacting to injuries from Game of Thrones. Like only the best show on TV. If you like the video, be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you can be notified when we post new content. If you are a returning member of the Intern Army, be sure to hit the like button and share this video with a friend. And if you feel so inclined, be sure to check out the merch shelf because we do have Dr. Chris merch on sale now, specifically for you, the design that you picked out. And as always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris, not your everyday ortho.